What's up, everyone? Let me post this to Twitter really quick, then I'll get right to it. So, you see this little hank of land right here. Well, it's not a little hank of land. Essequibo. Guyana Essequibo is the name of this area. Okay? So, Venezuela claims that this territory is theirs. But Guyana, which governs this territory, Guyana, contrary to some of our leftist commenters on Twitter, is a sovereign country. It is not a fake country. As a matter of fact, I had a guy yesterday mistake Guyana, right here, this red country, with this French colony over here of French Guyana. Like, so yeah, you have people on the internet making comments about the wrong country. You didn't even know this country existed until 15 minutes ago when I told you, but you are suddenly an expert on the geopolitical affairs of South America. So don't be a charlatan. So people are thinking that Venezuela and Guyana are going to bang over this very large hank of land. Venezuela claims it. They do like little flag raising stunts and stuff like that. They actually held a referendum on Sunday, which I'll get to later. You also see up here this little white, funny shaped island. That's Trinidad and Tobago. So Venezuela claims Guyana's territory, 2/3 of Guyana. Like you see this map. This is the disputed region, Essequibo, right? So if Venezuela is able to take over Essequibo, Guyana is basically going to look like Togo in West Africa. It's going to be a thin, little, irrelevant strip of land hugging the. Like, no country is going to go for this. Like, what country in the world is going to let another country? Venezuela is already big enough. No country is going to let another country just come and take over 2/3 of their country. I'm sorry. They are going to fight tooth and nail to keep that from happening. This is especially important because oil was discovered in this region in the mid 2000s. Not just any type of oil, light, sweet, crude oil that is easy to refine. So Venezuela is granted, yeah, it's in a bit of trouble. The U.S. is leaning on it hard. Basically, they're ordering Maduro to conduct free and fair elections. Otherwise, they're going to put more sanctions on this country. So Maduro is in trouble. So I read this saber rattling as an attempt by Maduro to shore up internal support so that he doesn't get put in the pack. That's pretty much what it is. So you have two sovereign countries that are beefing over this very oil and mineral rich area because um, people thought years ago that this was just a fucking jungle, like there was nothing there. I think this is where Georgetown was. I think this is where I think this is where fucking Jim Jones had his cult at in this little region over here. But anyways, so yeah, Guyana is in the right. Like you should not be happy that another country is going to is making a claim on 2/3 of your turf. Like that's just a no-no. And a lot of people on leftist Twitter are just like they see Venezuela and they see good, like this imbecile. I had him blocked. I can unblock him. This idiot, Haas, he says that as Americans, it is our duty to unconditionally support Venezuela's claim to Guyana Essequibo. Venezuela is fighting the remnants of foreign meddling in the Americas. Guyana, he can't even spell fucking Guyana. Oh, I guess he's spelling it the Spanish way because he's a LARPer. Anyways, Guyana's border with Venezuela, called the Schomburg Line, was established by Britain near the middle of the 1800s, so invoking the big bad colonial power. Venezuela was colonized by the Spanish, and Guyana was colonized by the British. Guyana is not a white country, okay? Guyana's population, if I recall correctly, East Indians, people that the British brought to Guyana after the end of slavery to serve as indentured servants on the plantations. It's a plurality Indian country, and it's 30% African. And there's a lot of mixed people, and there are a lot of indigenous people, especially in the Essequibo region. So this is not a white country. I think white people only make up like 0.5% of the country's population, so less than 1% of the population. Like Israel, it is entirely artificial and cut right into established Venezuelan territory. It was an outright violation of Pan American sovereignty by a completely foreign power that had no business in our continent. So, did the Spanish have business in our continent? This guy isn't even American, he's Arab. But he's commenting on shit that was going on while his ancestors were still in fucking, I think he's from Lebanon. I don't know. But yeah, he's an American citizen. But he just comes in, he just makes all of these wild, ridiculous claims and backs the Venezuelan claim without even doing any basic research on what he's doing. Like he's not American. When I say American, I mean like his roots are not indigenous. He's not indigenous to the Americas. Okay? His people weren't brought here as slaves. His people were not exploited here as Americans. I think his parents came over or something like that. I don't know fucking infrahas lore. But anyways, like this is just the pinnacle of arrogance. Am I saying that Hajj is a meddling foreigner? Absolutely not. But like, bro, just stay in your lane. Like you're not Guyanese, you're not Venezuelan, you're not descended from people who were indigenous to the Americas, you're not descended from people who were enslaved in the Americas. Like you don't have any fucking take. Your take is going to be trash unless you do research and unless you study. My bad, I'm Guyana. Bruh. Guyana. Guyana. I'm going to spell it in chat. Guyana. Guyana. Anyways, when the patriotic Venezuelans appealed to us for help, we defended their right to dispute the claims against Britain. But the international bankster cartel, see, this is LaRouche language. This guy's a fucking LaRouche. International bankster cartel, like who talks like this besides a fucking conspiracy nut? Nearing a full coup of U.S. sovereignty with the establishment of the Federal Reserve in 1913. This is a right-wing John Birch conspiracy theory. Ensured that the U.S.-led commission decided in Britain's favor. So he's talking about the Anglo-American transatlantic ruling class. Most recently, the international bankster cartel, including the remnants of Rockefeller oil, have bought out the entire government of Guyana to plunder its resources. So we should just let Venezuela plunder its resources instead. If Venezuela launches a reclamation of their territory, killing untold thousands of Indian, um, black and indigenous people. Like that's what Haas doesn't understand. Like this is just like a fucking football game. Like real people are going to be hurt. Real people are going to die. Oh, what's up, Ace? Hope you enjoy. Like real people are going to be hurt. Real people are going to die. But he doesn't give a fuck. All he cares about is his fucking ridiculous uh geopolitical football crap. I see why this guy couldn't hack it in law school. If you support Palestine, stand with Venezuela. If you're proud to be an American, stand with Venezuela. I support Palestine, but I'm not proud to be an American. And I'm far more American than this idiot. Anyways, back to block. So that's the revisionist. Well, I would much rather have a revisionist than Haas. Haas is just an outright fascist. Um, But my position is that Venezuela shouldn't burn away the goodwill it's built since the time of Chavez among black people by trying to take the land of a country that's 30% black and plurality Indian just so it could take its oil. Because that's what this is about. Okay? That is what this is about. Maduro is trying to shore up his faltering internal base with propaganda, with saber rattling bullshit, and he's trying to weld his country together. Nothing welds a country together like the war or a threat of the war. But is this going to go through on the international level? No. Like Maduro is just running his mouth. He's not going to be able to take this country's territory. Guyana is backed by the world's biggest gun store, the United States. So that ain't happening. Then you also have Brazil, who's ready to play too. So no, that's not going to go very well. It's aimed at stoking nationalist fervor to distract from his lack of popular support. So what do the people who actually live here say? Like, what do the people of the Essequibo think? See, this is the map that they've been teaching kids in school. Like they collect. This is the Essequibo right here. So Venezuela's gonna get a dick if this goes through. Yeah, Maduro wants Venezuela to have a dick. Whoop de fucking do. So the New York Times, which I despise, says that some analysts draw parallels to a former president of Argentina, Leopoldo Galtieri, who led during that country's military dictatorship in order to an invasion of the Falkland Islands in 1982. I drew this parallel earlier. Amid declining popularity, he was defeated by the British military, which led to his removal from power. So, if if Maduro is actually crazy enough to try to like invade Guyana, this is probably what's going to happen to him. The people who live in Essequibo are largely English speaking, identify culturally as Guyanese, and say they want to remain part of Guyana, the only government most have ever known. Even when it was a part of the Spanish Empire, it was considered a remote and undeveloped territory. Many residents said they enjoyed the tranquility of life at Essequibo and the economic benefits from the oil boom, which I'm going to talk about later, and feared that they would have to leave their homes if Venezuela gained sovereignty over the region. If we lose Essequibo, where are we going to live? Said Abdul Rashid, a taxi driver who said he was happy and proud of how the government was handling the situation. Bob Mahadio, a photographer and video editor, said he didn't understand how Venezuela could claim the land when it had been developed by Guyanese. This is our land, he said. Guyanese really have to stand up and fight against these people because this is our hard sweat and earnings here. So, yeah, they're right. Like, you cannot just come in and take over other people's shit, especially after, of course, with the help of ExxonMobil and all of these other stupid ass corporations from the Imperial Core. But, like, Guyana built this up. The Spanish basically just thought it was a fucking desert and jungle and savanna and left it. The Spanish didn't do shit with it. So this is a surprising article from Black Agenda Report because Black Agenda Report tends to lean towards the like hardcore revisionist side of things. But so what is the cause of all this? Like, what did this happen? What happened? So what Haas was talking about, he was talking about the British basically just coming in and being a dick and taking away Venezuela's land because they all have this victim shit going on. Anyways, so the author of this article, Tamanisha John, says that while border tensions between Venezuela and Guyana are not new, they tend to be aggravated by external European and now U.S. interests in Guyana's resource extractive sectors. In 1899, the borders between an independent Venezuela and British Guyana were considered to be settled via an arbitral award in which Venezuela, Great Britain, the United States, and what is now Guyana were all signatories. Thus, in real terms, after forcing the British to concede to arbitration of gold-rich Guyana in 1895, because that's what the original colonists wanted, they wanted gold, and they were still kind of hung up on gold, even in the 1800s. Both Venezuela and Great Britain received a judgment on the shared border of Guyana in 1899, and both parties accepted those boundaries as full, perfect, and final. It would not be until August 18, 1962, that Venezuelan President Romulo Betancourt, given the knowledge that Guyana would soon become independent from Great Britain, declared the arbitral award null and void. This date marks the discursive controversy of Venezuela and Guyana border tensions, as legally the border is considered settled. Worrying for liberal Venezuelan President Betancourt in 1962 was internal left Venezuelan opposition to his rule. A staunch anti-communist, Betancourt faced challenges from communist groups in Venezuela in the early 60s, some of them which were armed. He vowed that the communists would never get power in Venezuela and suppressed these groups. Internationally, he also supported U.S. interventions in Guatemala, U.S. goals to get rid of Castro in Cuba, and cooperated with the U.S. militarily and economically. Betancourt not only blamed left movements within Venezuela on the Cuban Revolution, but when Betancourt declared the arbitral award that legally defined Venezuela's border with Guyana as null and void, he did so to prevent what he saw as a communist named Chedi Jagan leaving Guyana's independence from Britain. Betancourt's government claimed that communist subversives in Venezuela were receiving guns from British Guyana, soon to become just Guyana, and used this argument to recommend Guyana not become independent. So Maduro is basing his attempt to annex 2/3 of Guyana's territory on a claim made by an anti-communist dictator, Betancourt, um, and who did all sorts of horrible things, supported all sorts of horrible things. Like this dude supported killing Castro. This dude supported toppling the established government of Guatemala, and he worked with the U.S. militarily and economically. Basically, everything that these revisionists on Twitter are claiming that Guyana is doing. Guyana actually has a very strong anti-imperialist and socialist heritage. We already heard about Chedi Jagan, But Walter Rodney, one of my favorite political economists, was also Guyanese. And I don't think that he would like people who claim to be revolutionary communists saying that 2/3 of his homeland should be annexed by Venezuela. So, thus, ironically, Venezuela's current position on the border dispute with Guyana is informed by the country's anti communism of 1962. It was also in 62 that Betancourt sought help from both the US and Britain in nulling the arbitral award prior to Guyana receiving independence. This did not happen. So she goes on to talk about the rise of Venezuelan left chauvinism on the border with Guyana after Chavez. Chavez in 2004 declared the border dispute between Venezuela and Guyana as a legacy of colonialism and a byproduct of Western intervention and anti communism on the part of one of his predecessors, and committed Venezuela to a diplomacy process that would involve the UN to settle the dispute through a good officer mechanism. Jamaican economist Norman Gervin served as the good officer to help both countries reach a settlement to the controversy from 2010 until his passing in 2014. So, because the guy that they had as a referee died, no settlement of the controversy between the two countries was reached. But under Chavez, they were actually friendly. Um, it was initially assumed that after Chavez's passing, that Maduro would continue friendly relations with Guyana, but Maduro is substantially less popular than Chavez was. Oil exploration in Guyana in 2013 and the eventual oil find in May 2015 would see Maduro not only revive Venezuela's border controversy with Guyana, but also reject diplomatic settlement of the controversy, given that any diplomatic settlement would not be in Venezuela's favor to annex the region. So this guy is fucking desperate. When ExxonMobil announced a significant oil discovery off Guyana's coast on May 20th, 2015, Maduro issued a decree 6 days later claiming sovereignty over 80% of Guyana's continental shelf. 2 months after issuing the decree, Maduro announced in July 2015 a strategy to recover the Essequibo, which, like today, includes issuing residents in Essequibo Venezuelan ID cards, aka illegal documents. Venezuela's annexation proclamations are not only paternalistic, given lack of consultation with those in Essequibo, but also guarantees the border with Guyana will become more stringent and heavily policed by Guyana and its newfound Western allies. So they're talking about how they're afraid of ExxonMobil and how they're afraid of the Americans coming in, setting up military bases and all that shit. But his saber rattling is basically going to ensure that that's going to happen because Guyana is not going to let 2/3 of its territory be taken away, nor should they. So they're going to reach out and find whatever allies they can. And you've got the U.S. right up here and the Anglophone Caribbean, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada, all of these countries, all of these islands are going to back up Guyana because, like, they've got a historical tie. The masses of the Anglophone Caribbean are not going to support Venezuela taking over 2/3 of Guyana, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, because Trinidad and Tobago, like, you could literally stand in the far south of Trinidad and look at Venezuela. And Trinidad and Tobago is also an oil producing country. So, no, they're not going to let that happen. The prospects for actual confrontation between the two countries thus appears to be high in some, given three prominent reasons. First, Venezuela has no legal claim to the Essequibo and thus could only annex the territory by force. Venezuela's response to the border is part of the security calculations Venezuela has had to make in light of the oil find in Guyana, which has enmeshed Guyana in Western security, extractive, and corporate governance. Second, Guyana's government is willing to receive help via U.S. military intervention in the region, given Venezuela's baseless legal claim to the Essequibo. Politicians in Guyana, beholden to oil and newfound Western security and corporate interests, are banking on these entities to purportedly help Guyana develop. Oh, that sounds like dingism. Guess who likes dingism, Haas? Lastly, ExxonMobil will want to protect its oil interests in Guyana, and at minimum, Venezuela's proclamations call into question Guyana and thus regional stability, of which ExxonMobil will also lobby for U.S. intervention because ExxonMobil doesn't want its plants and its refineries and all these other things taken over by Venezuela. As Chavez stated almost 2 decades ago, the situation unfolding lays bare the sad and ongoing legacies of colonialism and Western intervention in South America and the Caribbean. So, the boom. They were talking about economic development of Guyana via ExxonMobil. This is an Intercept article about like life in Guyana during this situation. All of this, I'm going to upload this to YouTube, and all of these articles are going to be in the YouTube description. So it wasn't until 2008, a few months after Venezuela nationalized oil and booted out most of the foreign major powers, that the companies began exploring the waters offshore Guyana in earnest. Because if there's anything that the bourgeoisie is, it is creative, and they always know where they can go to steal something else. Shell left the partnership in 2014, while Exxon brought on two new partners, Hess Corporation, an independent American oil company best known as an early mover in the fracking boom, and the China National Offshore Oil Corporation. The very next year, Exxon announced that it had found oil, more than 10 billion barrels of it, and not just any oil, it was light, sweet crude, the oil that's easiest to refine, commanding the highest price on the global market. Suddenly, in 2015, Exxon announced that they had found oil, and people were suddenly going crazy talking about oil wealth. The cricket team of Guyana, the Amazon Warriors, literally has ExxonMobil emblazoned across the front of their uniform, so you're going to know who owns you. When you walked in the streets, you would hear every Guyanese saying, "Thank God for Exxon. If it wasn't for Exxon, we would have never been able to see cricket live on television." Do you see how dangerous that is? Yes, I do. Whenever it can, Exxon reminds the public of its cricket sponsorship and conservation efforts. A marketing video the company released last year to address controversy around its contract with Guyana is a perfect example. Even the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, traditionally conservative and pro-oil, have described the deal as unfair to Guyana. So they put together a Facebook video that starts at the National Cricket Stadium. The first minute and a half focuses on the company's investments in cricket before Exxon's public relations lead takes to the streets, picking people at random to talk about the contract, and then back to the fucking cricket stadium. So yeah. Guyana needs money to lift its people out of poverty. She just doesn't think another cycle of what development economists would call the resource curse, or the phenomenon of countries with an abundance of natural resources winding up with less economic growth, development, and democracy is going to do that. Where's the money from the gold? Where's the money from the bauxite? Where's the money from the diamonds? Where's the money from the sugar? Where's the money from the agriculture? Where's the money from the fishing? The list is almost endless because we are so full of wealth, and yet the people in this country are so poor. Sounds like a bit of socialism is needed. Like you should nationalize all of this shit. Fuck ExxonMobil. But the thing is, this is for the Guyanese people themselves to do. How is Guyana going to become developed and rich? Because that is what socialists, even Maoists, want. How is Guyana going to become developed and rich? And by rich, I mean the people having everything that they need, having housing, having free schooling, having free healthcare, having control over their destiny as a people, and not having to worry about where their next meal is going to come from. How are they going to get to be that way if Venezuela takes away 2/3 of their country? Now all the fucking oil is gone. You are going to be reduced to this. How can a country like this, with Venezuela taking the Essequibo for its big fat dick, how is a country that's reduced to a tiny sliver of land going to develop itself? So that's something that we should keep in mind before we just start making bold proclamations about the rights of Venezuela, because Venezuela is intent on violating the rights of Guyana. Do I think Sting was a CIA agent? You mean the guy from the police? Good. You all have some weird fucking thoughts bouncing around in your head. The leadership of Guyana cannot just take assurances from the Maduro government that they will not invade the country. Why would I think that the guy from the police was a CIA agent? Because he named his band the police? The leadership of Guyana cannot just take assurances from the Maduro government that they will not invade the country, because the only way that Venezuela is going to get what it wants is to literally invade its neighbor. And people are talking about this referendum. The vice president of Guyana called the vote rigged and questioned the turnout figures, because like okay, like people were going around, like independent journalists and observers were going around looking at the polling stations, and at many of these polling stations there was nobody there. But you got Maduro and his electoral authority saying on Sunday that all of the questions passed with more than 95% approval, and at least 10.5 million votes were cast for yes. So what exactly were they voting on? Let's see. What were they voting on? So, the following questions were approved by the National Electoral Council on October 23rd. Let's see. Question 1. Do you agree to reject by all means, in accordance with the law, the line fraudulently interposed by the 1899 Paris Arbitration Awards, which seeks to deprive us of our Guyana Essequibo? So you can tell, like, this is not a very democratic process. This is what you call a question that's loaded. Of course, nobody's going to vote against this. Like, the way that the way that this is worded, it's intended to lead people towards the conclusion that that Maduro wants. Do you support the 1966 Geneva Agreement as the only valid legal instrument to reach a practical and satisfactory conclusion for Venezuela and Guyana regarding controversy over the territory of Guyana Essequibo? Do you agree with Venezuela's historical position of not recognizing the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice to resolve the territorial controversy over Guyana Essequibo? So basically, we're not going to recognize the people who say that we have no right over this. Do you agree to oppose, by all legal means, Guyana's claim to unilaterally dispose of a sea pending delimitation illegally and in violation of international law? Well, you got some fucking cojones. Do you agree with the creation of the Guyana Essequibo state and the development of an accelerated plan for comprehensive care for the current and future population of that territory, which includes, among others, the granting of citizenship and an identity card? Venezuela, in accordance with the Geneva Agreement and international law, consequently incorporated the said state on the map of Venezuelan territory. So, do we get to steal Guyana's land? That's essentially what this means. And they're flat out lying about the turnout. Their top electoral official claimed that voter turnout was massive, but journalists and independent observers reported that polling stations across the country were vacant. So nobody showed up for this shit, but here's Maduro. Here's Maduro. Proud and happy. Anyways, ooh, his hair is gray. You can tell this guy's going through it.
After Venezuela's authorities said voters had overwhelmingly approved the takeover of an oil-rich region in neighboring Guyana, a victorious President Nicolás Maduro vowed to abide by the will of the people and attacked those, he said, were trying to undermine the results.
To the right-wingers who support ExxonMobil, the financed right wing that supports the...
This is how he always talks. Like the Black Agenda Report article literally says that his claim over this territory is rooted in a right-wing interpretation established by a right-wing president, Romualdo Betancourt. And here he is like, this is a fucking demagogue. Like, do I think that the United States should go in and bomb Caracas into fucking rubble? Absolutely not. But like, this guy he's a populist. He's a populist demagogue. That's what he is.
Rights of Guyana and not those of Venezuela. I tell them we are moving forward.
So fuck the rights of Guyana, Venezuela. That sounds like fucking chauvinism. That's what this is.
Referendum
national chauvinism
is binding, and I will comply with the mandate of the people. The people's voice is sacred. The voice of the people is the voice of God.
Venezuelan election authorities said 95% of the 10.5 million votes they have counted were in favor of creating a new Venezuelan state in the Essequibo, a densely forested region that Venezuela says was stolen when the border was drawn more than a century ago. But some
El Essequibo is nuestro. The Essequibo is ours. Maduro says that this is a triumph of all of the Venezuelan people. So, if there wasn't oil here, he wouldn't give a fuck. If there wasn't oil here, he would not give a fuck. He knows he's in trouble. He knows that he's facing growing dissent internally, so he's trying to shore up his people. This is what demagogues do. They try to distract from what's actually going on in the country and try to gin up nationalistic fervor. And what better way to gin up nationalistic fervor than trying to prosecute a fucking war? Do I think that Guyana and Venezuela are actually going to fight? No, because Venezuela would definitely get wiped. Even though they have a pretty strong military, they're going to have the entire English speaking Caribbean against them. And Guyana is also backed by Brazil and the United States. So, yeah, would be very fun for them. That is not a coalition that you will win against. And I think Maduro knows this, but yeah. And he's not like people keep trying to characterize him as crazy. No, he might act crazy sometimes, like ginning up this shit, but he's not crazy.
Venezuelans remain skeptical.
Everything they said is a lie, because I passed by several polling centers, and everything was always empty. I don't know where they got that number of people who supposedly voted for the Essequibo.
The government promoted the referendum for weeks, calling it an act of patriotism and using it as a way to gauge Maduro's support ahead of next year's
Oh, that's very leftist. Let's just gin up reactionary, nationalistic, patriotic, jingoistic fervor.
presidential election. Venezuela's long claimed the area, but tensions only increased after large deposits of oil were found in 2015. On Monday, the U.S. State Department said it supported a negotiated settlement.
We support a peaceful resolution of the border dispute between Venezuela and Guyana. The 1899 award determined the land boundary between Venezuela and Guyana should be respected unless or until the parties come to a new agreement or a competent legal body decides otherwise. This is not something that will be settled by a referendum.
It's unclear what steps the Venezuelan government will take to follow through on the result, but any action is likely to be met with international condemnation. In the meantime, Maduro's rhetoric is keeping Guyana on edge. Alessandro Ampietti, Al Jazeera.
And for more, let's go to...
So, yeah. Who should the left support in this? Guyana, obviously. Like, you cannot just go in and take another country's land. Okay, you cannot do that, especially if oil is found there, because that makes you look like an ass. And what Venezuela is doing is they are throwing away all of the goodwill that Comandante Chavez built amongst the black people of the world, because Guyana is a black and brown country, so is Venezuela. But like, this is just national chauvinism, and it's disgusting. And the revisionists who are actually supporting this shit are also very disgusting. So, yeah, learn what imperialism is and oppose it, even if it's done by people who fancy themselves leftists. I'm being